They say the ocean never forgets. Every soul lost to its black depths lingers, restless, waiting to be remembered. I didn't believe that until I took a cruise that changed everything. It was supposed to be a luxury getaway. The Ocean Star, a massive cruise liner that carried more than 3,000 passengers, all of them eager to escape the monotony of their lives for a week at sea. Families, couples, retirees, people from every walk of life. The ship was a floating city, multiple pools, a theater, casinos, endless buffets. Everything glittered with the promise of leisure. But by the end of the voyage, no one was talking about the shows or the drinks. Everyone whispered about the woman who vanished, and what some passengers swore they saw in the days before she disappeared. Her name was Rachel Miller. She was in her early 30s, traveling alone. That detail stood out to everyone. Cruises are filled with groups, but Rachel seemed content by herself, always with a book in hand. I saw her a few times on deck, short brown hair tucked under a wide sun hat, a pale woman who looked like she carried a sadness that had followed her onto the ship. On the second night, people claimed they heard her screaming. The Ocean Star was cutting through waters darker than ink, with only the moonlight painting silver streaks across the waves. Around 1 a.m., a scream echoed across Deck 10. The kind of sound that makes your blood go cold because it's pure, primal terror. Several passengers rushed out of their cabins. Some said they saw Rachel standing at the railing, arms spread, her head tilted back as if something had pulled her upward. But when anyone tried to approach, she bolted, running barefoot across the deck, her dress whipping like sea foam in the wind. By the time security was alerted, she was gone. The officers combed the ship. They checked every cabin, every corridor, even the storage rooms below deck. But Rachel had vanished. Here's the part that unsettled everyone: the cameras. Cruise ships have security cameras everywhere, especially on the main decks. But when the footage from Deck 10 was reviewed, Rachel wasn't on it. No figure standing at the railing, no one running. Nothing but empty corridors and the sound of static crackling through the audio feed. Passengers who swore they had seen her insisted the footage had been tampered with. The ship's staff said otherwise. They chalked it up to overactive imaginations and late-night drinking. But people kept talking. On the third night, another scream echoed, but this time from the pool area. A young couple claimed they found Rachel again. Only her face was wet, her hair dripping as though she had just climbed out of the ocean. She whispered something to them in a voice they said didn't sound human. Before they could react, she slipped into the shadows and was gone again. The next morning, the captain made an announcement. Rachel Miller had officially been reported missing. They had searched the entire ship, and there was no sign of her. The U.S. Coast Guard would be alerted once they reached the next port. But for the remainder of the voyage, the passengers were asked to remain calm and respect the privacy of the investigation. Calm was impossible. Rumors spread faster than the tides. Some whispered that Rachel had jumped overboard that first night, and what people had been seeing since wasn't really her. Others said the Ocean Star had sailed directly through the site of a shipwreck decades earlier, and Rachel's spirit had been taken by whatever still lingered beneath. The staff tried to shut down the gossip, but late at night, the corridors echoed with whispers, and the bravest passengers swore they saw Rachel standing silently at the end of the hallways, her dress dripping with seawater. One elderly woman, Mrs. Jacobs, told me she woke up at 3 a.m. to find Rachel standing at the foot of her bed, lips moving soundlessly. She blinked, and the figure was gone. By the fifth night, paranoia infected the entire ship. The crew doubled their patrols, the casino sat nearly empty, and families refused to let their children wander off alone. Everyone waited for the next scream, and it came. The final night of the cruise, just before dawn, the loudspeaker crackled. A voice, distorted and panicked, broke through. "Oh, she's on the deck! She's going overboard!" The message cut out. Passengers rushed outside, and for a moment, dozens of people saw the same thing. Rachel Miller, standing on the railing of Deck 10, her arms outstretched, her hair plastered against her face with seawater. She looked directly at the crowd, then toppled backward into the ocean below. The captain stopped the ship. Searchlights pierced the dark waves. Rescue teams scoured the water for hours, but Rachel was never found. When the Ocean Star finally docked, the Coast Guard took statements. The official report would later state that Rachel Miller was presumed drowned, though no body was ever recovered. But those who were there, we know better. You don't mistake dozens of people seeing the same impossible thing. You don't imagine screams that echo across steel and water. Rachel didn't just vanish. She became part of the ocean's memory. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear her voice, faint, distorted, like it's carried through fathoms of water, whispering from the darkness below. Cruise ships are meant to be fun, glamorous places. But there's one part of every ship most passengers never see: the crew decks below, where the real work happens. Narrow corridors, humming machinery, low ceilings with pipes sweating condensation. It feels more like a factory than a floating resort. On my last cruise, I made the mistake of going down there, and I swear to you, I will never set foot on a ship again. The Mariner of the Gulf was a smaller cruise liner compared to the mega ships. Maybe 1,200 passengers, mostly families and retirees. It had been a peaceful trip. Sunny days, calm waters, smiling crew members who made sure you always had a drink in your hand. But late one night, curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't sleep. My cabin was on Deck 6, and from my balcony I could hear this sound. Not the usual groaning of metal or sloshing of waves. This was something else. It was faint, but constant. A low, rhythmic murmur, almost like voices. At first I thought it was people in the next cabin over. But when I pressed my ear against the wall, I realized the sound wasn't coming from beside me. It was coming from below. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The guest elevators only went down to Deck 4. Anything lower was for crew only. But while wandering the hallways, I noticed a service door propped slightly open. Inside was a stairwell that smelled of oil and rust. My heart pounded, but I told myself I was just being adventurous. I slipped inside. The stairwell went down 2 more levels. When I pushed open the heavy door at the bottom, I found myself in a narrow corridor lined with metal walls. The air was warmer down there, thicker, almost humid. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that twitched with each buzz of the bulbs. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that. But the voices were clearer now. They weren't crew members talking. They weren't even in English. It was a chorus of whispers, dozens of them, all speaking at once in some guttural, watery language that scraped against my nerves. I crept down the hallway following the sound. It led me past storage rooms and maintenance closets, deeper into the bowels of the ship. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell of salt water became, as if the ocean itself was leaking through the steel. Finally, I came to a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The voices were behind it, louder, urgent. I should have turned back, but I pushed it open. The room beyond was dim, lit by a single red bulb swinging overhead. Pipes lined the walls, dripping with condensation that pooled on the floor. And in the middle of the room was a hatch. A thick, rusting metal hatch bolted into the floor. The voices were seeping up through it. I crouched, straining to listen. My breath fogged in the warm air. The whispers rose and fell like waves, sometimes merging into a single inhuman chorus, other times splitting into overlapping fragments. And then, one of them said my name. I froze. My blood turned to ice. There was no possible way anyone down there knew me. I hadn't even told the crew my full name. And yet, clear as day, a voice rasped up through the hatch, stretched and distorted by water. "Michael!" I stumbled backward, my shoulder slamming into the wall. The whispers surged louder, urgent, like they were calling me closer. That's when I noticed the bolts on the hatch. They weren't sealed shut. They had been loosened. Fresh tool marks scratched around the edges, as if someone or something had been trying to open it from below. A sudden clang echoed down the corridor behind me. Footsteps. Heavy boots pounding against the metal floor. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and a crew member stormed in. He was a large man in coveralls, face grim. When he saw me near the hatch, his expression twisted into panic. "What the hell are you doing down here?" he barked, yanking me away from the hatch. I heard voices," I stammered. His eyes widened, and he shook his head furiously. "You didn't hear anything. You understand? You didn't hear a damn thing." Before I could argue, 2 more crew members appeared. They grabbed me by the arms and practically dragged me back up the stairwell. By the time I was shoved out onto deck 4, I was trembling. The next morning, I tried to tell another passenger what had happened. But when I mentioned the hatch, she gave me a strange look. She said she'd overheard the crew talking late at night about something sealed below deck, something they weren't supposed to disturb. The rest of the trip was a blur of paranoia. Every time I passed a crew member, I wondered if they knew I had been down there. I avoided sleep because whenever I closed my eyes, I swore I could still hear my name being whispered. Faint, wet, echoing. When the cruise finally ended, I rushed off that ship and promised myself I'd never go back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That wet chorus rising from below, calling me back. And I know one thing for certain. There's something alive beneath those decks. Something sealed away, whispering, waiting for the bolts to come loose. Fog changes everything at sea. On a clear night, the horizon is endless. The moon reflects on black water, and you can almost convince yourself the ocean is beautiful. But when the fog rolls in, it's like the world collapses. You can't see the sky. You can't see the waves. The ship feels like it's drifting into nothingness, cut off from reality. That's what happened on the Pacific horizon. It was the 4th night of the cruise, somewhere between California and Mexico. I was traveling with my wife, and up until then, the trip had been perfect. Warm weather, good food, live music every evening. A dream vacation. But then, sometime after midnight, a dense fog swallowed the ship. At first, the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've entered a bank of heavy fog. Please stay indoors and avoid the outer decks until visibility improves. Thank you for your cooperation. We thought nothing of it. Fog happens." But hours later, it was still there, thick, suffocating, clinging to the glass like pale hands pressing inward. By morning, the world outside the windows was nothing but white. No sunrise, no horizon, no ocean. Just endless fog. At breakfast, the atmosphere was tense. People whispered about how the ship's horn had been blasting all night long, a low groaning wail that rattled through the walls. Some passengers looked pale and exhausted. A few claimed they'd heard something moving in the fog, something that answered the horn. I thought it was just nerves, until I saw it myself. That evening, I stood on my balcony, staring into the endless gray. The fog wasn't still. It shifted, curled, moved in patterns like it was alive. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. But then, shapes began to form. Figures. They were faint, almost transparent, drifting in the mist. Dozens of them. They moved slowly, as though walking along invisible ground. And then one of them turned toward me. It was a man, his features blurred by the fog. But I could see his eyes, dark hollows that seemed to stretch endlessly inward. He lifted a hand, pressing it against nothing, as if there was a wall of glass between us. And then he smiled. I stumbled back into the cabin, slamming the balcony door shut. My wife asked what was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Later that night, the screams started. From down the hall, a woman shrieked, "There's someone in my room!" Crew members rushed past us, key cards flashing as they unlocked her cabin. Minutes later, they emerged with pale faces, whispering to each other. The woman was gone. Her belongings were still inside, her shoes by the bed, her purse on the desk, but she wasn't there. By the next morning, 3 more passengers had vanished. The captain finally addressed everyone over the loudspeaker, his voice tighter this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing unusual weather conditions. We are in constant communication with the Coast Guard. Please remain calm and stay inside your cabins when possible." But no one felt calm. People barricaded their doors, dragging furniture in front of them. The dining halls were half empty. And still, the fog pressed in, heavier than ever. That night, unable to sleep, I peeked through the curtain, and I saw the missing passengers. They were outside, standing in the fog. Their clothes were the same, but their faces were pale, drained of all color, their eyes black voids. They stood perfectly still, staring at the ship. And then, in unison, they lifted their hands and pressed them against the fog. That was when I realized the fog wasn't just weather. It was a wall, a barrier between us and them. And whatever they were, they wanted us to join them. By dawn, the fog had not lifted. The missing passengers were not found. And when we finally docked in Cabo San Lucas, the ship emerged into clear skies as if nothing had happened. But no announcement was made about the disappearances. No names were called. No investigation was mentioned. The crew smiled as if everything was normal, urging everyone to enjoy the sunny port. I've never felt such a wrongness in my life, because I know what I saw in that fog. And I know those people are still out there, walking endlessly in that pale void. And sometimes, when the weather turns gray back home, I catch myself peeking into the mist, praying I don't see those black, hollow eyes staring back at me. Every cruise ship has its showpiece, a place designed to impress. On the Atlantic Crown, it was the Grand Ballroom. It spanned 2 decks, lined with golden chandeliers, velvet curtains, and polished marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. At night, The ballroom hosted dances and concerts. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. But there was one night when that ballroom was filled with something else. It was the 5th evening of our cruise. I was traveling with a group of friends, and we decided to attend the formal gala. Everyone dressed up in tuxedos and gowns, eager to feel like royalty. The ballroom was alive, hundreds of people twirling beneath chandeliers, the band playing old standards, the staff gliding across the floor with silver trays. For a while, it felt magical. But then the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. The ship lurched violently, the chandeliers swaying as lightning flashed through the tall windows. The music faltered. People screamed. Glasses shattered across the marble. And then came the water. At first, it was just a trickle seeping through the seams of the windows. Then, suddenly, one of them shattered inward, and a wall of black seawater came roaring into the ballroom. The crowd erupted in chaos. People scrambled for the doors as the water surged higher, sweeping chairs and tables into a deadly whirlpool. The band abandoned their instruments. The chandeliers flickered, sparks raining down as the lights failed. I was shoved against the wall, fighting to breathe as icy water rose to my chest. I could hear people screaming, choking, begging. But the strangest thing was, amid the chaos, I also heard music. The band wasn't playing anymore. But from beneath the water, faint and distorted, came the sound of violins. The ballroom flooded completely. The lights went out, and for a moment in the darkness, I thought it was over. But then, everything changed. I opened my eyes, and the ballroom was dry again. The chandeliers glowed golden. The crowd twirled gracefully, their gowns floating like mist. But something was wrong. Their faces. They were pale, bluish, their eyes cloudy as though they had drowned long ago. Yet they danced on, smiling faintly, their movements unnaturally smooth. And the band, oh God. The band was still playing, but their instruments dripped with water, strings sagging, brass tarnished green. Each note echoed as though played underwater. I stood frozen as the dancers glided past me, their cold, damp sleeves brushing against my arm. Not one of them acknowledged me. They were caught in an endless waltz, a performance for no one but the dead. When I finally turned to run, the doors wouldn't open. My friends were gone. The walls stretched impossibly far, the chandeliers swinging overhead like glowing buoys beneath the sea. And then I saw her. At the center of the ballroom, leading the dance, was a woman in a tattered gown. Her veil floated as though underwater, though the air was still. She raised her head, and I saw her face, skin bloated, lips purple, eyes like two pearls clouded in milk. She smiled at me, and the music swelled. The dancers parted, leaving a clear path toward her. I felt myself moving forward, my legs heavy, as though pulled by a current I couldn't resist. Her hand extended, dripping seawater. The music grew louder, the chandeliers flickering. And then I blinked. The ballroom was normal again. My friends were tugging at my arm, shouting my name. The crowd was shaken but alive, staff urging everyone to evacuate because of the storm damage. When I looked back at the center of the room, there was nothing but shattered glass and water pooling across the marble floor. We left the ballroom, and the rest of the cruise passed uneventfully. But that night has never left me. Because sometimes when I hear a violin playing faintly in the distance, I remember those pale dancers. And I wonder if the ocean still calls me back to finish that dance I never began. Every cruise ship has that one cabin people whisper about. The one the staff avoids. The one that seems harder to book. The one with stories that never make it onto the official brochures. On the Celestial Dream, that cabin was 309. I didn't know this when I boarded. I had just booked a last-minute ticket, a solo trip to escape the stress of work. Cabin 309 was available, cheaper than most, and I figured I'd gotten lucky. I didn't feel lucky once I stepped inside. The room was clean enough. 2 twin beds, a small desk, a porthole looking out at the endless ocean. But it was cold. Not just from the air conditioning. It felt heavy, damp, like the walls themselves were sweating. That first night, I woke at exactly 3:09 a.m. The cabin clock glowed in the dark, numbers bright and sharp. I didn't know why I woke until I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the door. I sat up, heart pounding. Another knock came, deliberate, echoing through the narrow corridor outside. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I went back to bed, convincing myself it was kids playing a prank. But the next night, it happened again. 3 knocks. Always at 3:09 a.m. Always no one there. By the third night, I decided I wouldn't open the door. I lay awake, waiting. The clock ticked closer. At 3:09, the knocks came, slow, heavy, rattling the door on its hinges. And then, a whisper. So faint, I thought I imagined it. "Let me in." The voice was wet, gurgling like water choking it. I didn't sleep after that. The following morning, I finally asked one of the stewards about cabin 309. His face went pale, and he shook his head quickly. Don't ask about that room. Some stories are better left alone." He hurried away before I could press him. That night, it escalated. At 3:09, the knocks came, louder than ever. I pressed my back against the door, holding it shut, though no one seemed to be pushing. The whisper returned, clearer now, multiple voices overlapping, all wet, all desperate. "Open the door. We're waiting." The porthole rattled. I turned, and my breath caught in my throat. Water was rising outside. It didn't make sense. The ship was moving through calm seas, yet the porthole showed water churning violently, bubbling as though something was pressing against the glass from outside. And in that water, faces. Dozens of them. Pale, bloated, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. Their hands slapped against the glass, leaving trails of foam. Then, with a sharp crack, the first fracture split across the porthole. I scrambled for the door, fumbling with the handle, but the knocks had stopped. And when I yanked it open, the hallway was flooded. Water rushed in, pulling me under. I fought to swim, lungs burning, but the corridor stretched endlessly, lights flickering above like distant stars. Figures floated around me, passengers in cruise attire drifting, their eyes white and unblinking. One of them turned. A woman in a sundress, her skin gray and torn. She smiled, and bubbles escaped her lips as she mouthed the words, "Welcome to the final voyage." I screamed, and suddenly, I was back in my bed. The room was dry, the hallway silent, the porthole clear. The clock read 3:10 a.m. It felt like a nightmare. But the sheets were soaked through, and my shoes, which I'd left by the door, squelched with seawater when I touched them. The next morning, I demanded to switch cabins. The front desk clerk looked at my room number, hesitated, then quietly moved me to deck 7 without asking questions. I didn't set foot near cabin 309 again. When the cruise ended, I did some digging. I learned that years earlier, during the Celestial Dream's maiden voyage, a burst pipe had flooded the lower decks. Several passengers in cabin 309 and the surrounding rooms had drowned before rescue crews could reach them. The ship had been repaired, repainted, its tragedy swept under the rug. But the dead never really left. And to this day, every time someone stays in cabin 309, they hear the knocks at 3:09 a.m. Some open the door, and those are the ones who never check out.